The sun had not yet risen when Marta Espina stepped off the city bus, her worn soles pressing into cracked pavement with familiarity carved by decades of early mornings and long, silent shifts. Though age had slowed her gait, her steps up Hemlock Hill remained steady, unwavering, muscle memory forged through 12 relentless years of routine. A delicate mist draped the affluent neighborhood like a veil, muting the hard edges of its stone mansions and whispering through perfectly manicured hedges. But Marta's gaze did not soften. Her eyes, dark and determined, remained fixed forward, sharp, focused, immune to the quiet opulence that surrounded her. In her grasp was a weathered canvas tote, frayed at the seams, heavy with the scent of lemon oil and bleach. Gloves dangled from one side, and the clink of metal brushes echoed faintly with each step. Tucked beneath the familiar clutter of rags and supplies, nestled deep and deliberately hidden, lay something far less ordinary, a flash drive, small and cold, humming with silent purpose. The judge's home emerged ahead, stately and immaculate, a monument of white columns and ivy-clad walls, an architectural ode to discipline, order, and reputation. She knew every inch of it, had scrubbed its marble stairs on her knees, polished the tarnish from its silver until her fingertips burned, dusted the books of law that lined the mahogany shelves without once opening them. For 12 years, every Tuesday, she had slipped inside quietly with the key they'd given her, trusted, unseen, a ghost in her own life. But Marta had not only been cleaning, she had been watching, listening, recording, a meticulous archivist of whispered phone calls, locked drawers, and late-night visitors. She had been collecting truths like shards of glass, dangerous and sharp, and waiting for the moment when all the silent work of 12 years would speak louder than any courtroom gavel. The judge had no idea what his son had done, and he was even less prepared for what Marta was about to do. 12 years earlier, Marta's world had collapsed in a single breath. 2:14 a.m., a moment she would relive 1,000 times in silence. She had been folding laundry in her cramped apartment, the hum of the dryer masking the slow dread of night, when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, sterile, and chillingly calm. "There's been an accident. Your son, Luis, is gone." The words seemed detached from reality, floating in the air like smoke. Her hands trembled, the warm fabric slipping from her grasp. Luis, her only child, had just turned 17, bright-eyed, tender-hearted. He dreamed of becoming an engineer. Drawings of bridges and engines still littered the kitchen table. That night, he had stayed late, picking up an extra shift at the auto shop. He had been walking home. Marta let out a cry so sharp, so guttural, it tore the stillness of the night like glass breaking in her throat. Her knees buckled. She screamed until her voice cracked and no sound would come. Luis hadn't stood a chance. The police called it an unfortunate case of vehicular manslaughter. The driver was Logan Whitmore, drunk, reckless, and untouchable, the son of Judge Whitmore. The case never saw a proper trial. A loophole here, a delay there, backroom deals and polished lawyers who reshaped tragedy into regret. In the end, Logan was given community service and probation. 2 months later, Logan boarded a first-class flight to a luxury rehab center in Switzerland. To reflect, to heal. Marta received no apology. Not a word, not a letter, not even a knock on her door. What she did receive, weeks later, was something else. A job offer, cleaning work, at Judge Whitmore's house. The very man who had quietly presided over the legal farce that had reduced her son's life to paperwork, who had signed away justice with the flick of a pen, who hadn't even looked at her in the courtroom hallway. She said yes. And every Tuesday since, Marta had stepped through those doors, not just to mop floors and polish furniture, but to carry out a vow whispered at her son's grave. She cleaned with precision, listened with intent, moved through the rooms like smoke, unseen, absorbing everything. She memorized the judge's routines, his calls, the rhythms of the house. Every scent, every silence became part of her map. Every week, she walked into the den where the law books lined the walls and imagined pulling them down, one by one, until only truth remained. She had come to clean, but she stayed to remember and to plan. At first, it was rage that drove Marta back each week, A burning, untamed fury that clawed at her ribs with every sweep of her mop, every wiped surface in that spotless mausoleum of privilege. But over time, something colder, more enduring took its place. Not anger, purpose, a quiet, methodical resolve that sharpened her instincts and steadied her hands. She began to notice patterns, subtle but telling. The way the judge's voice dropped to a near whisper when Logan's name surfaced during late-night phone calls. The tension in his jaw. The rushed shuffling of papers whenever she neared the study. Once, he left the door ajar, distracted by a call. Inside, a locked file cabinet stood exposed, the key still dangling from the lock. Marta waited, then slipped in, heart pounding, and photographed everything. Financial records, sealed transcripts, confidential memos bearing official letterheads. Things no civilian should have access to. Then came the disc, a half-melted CD, label faded but legible. Body cam November 2nd, 2013. She found it wedged behind an old cabinet while cleaning the judge's storage room. Something about the way it had been hidden, tossed, not filed, made her freeze. That night, back in her apartment, Marta inserted it into her laptop with trembling hands. Grainy footage flickered to life. Police lights pulsed like heartbeats. Sirens wailed. There was chaos, shouting. And then, through the static, Logan's voice, slurred and frantic, burst through, "I told you not to stop. Just hit him." Marta stared at the screen in horror. He wasn't alone. Another voice. Another silhouette in the passenger seat. A second man, older, calmer, the one behind the wheel. The truth hit her like a second death. Logan hadn't been the driver. He had taken the charge to protect someone. And someone else, someone powerful, had buried that fact beneath silence and favors. From that moment on, Marta became more than a housekeeper. She became a witness, a recorder, a vessel of facts no one else dared to carry. She cataloged everything, audio files, photos, scanned documents. She encrypted it all and uploaded it, piece by piece, to a secure private server. She reached out to a legal aid group under a pseudonym, found a lawyer who didn't flinch when he heard her story, filed the case under a false name, hidden in the folds of bureaucracy. Marta didn't seek revenge. She sought revelation. She wanted the truth dragged into daylight, unpolished and raw. She wanted the judge, so firm in law, so blind in blood, to sit across from her and finally, after 12 long years, really see, the cost of what he had allowed, what he had protected, what he had become. It began with small cracks, hairline fractures in the polished facade the Whitmores had spent years constructing. Marta noticed the first one on an overcast Thursday, when Logan came storming out onto back patio. Phone pressed tight to his ear, voice cracking under the weight of panic. "They found the dashcam file, Dad. She knows. I don't know how. This wasn't supposed to happen." Marta stood motionless just inside the glass door, sponge in hand, her heart thudding so loud she feared it might betray her. She turned away before he could see her, but the words had already etched themselves into her bones. A week later, the shift in the judge's behavior became unmistakable. The practiced warmth in his greetings cooled to brittle civility. He no longer asked about her health or nodded when she passed. The once half-open study door now remained firmly locked, even when he was inside. The air in the house grew heavier, paranoid, brittle, as if the walls themselves had begun to sweat with secrets. But the cleaner always finds the dirt. One morning, while scrubbing the kitchen sink, Marta caught a glimpse of him pacing in the sunlit hallway, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and strained. She stilled her movements, straining to hear. His voice cracked mid-sentence. "If this gets out, Logan will go to prison. I'll lose my seat, my pension, everything." That night, Marta couldn't sleep. She sat at the edge of her bed, her fingers trembling as she struck a match and lit the small candle she kept beneath Luis's photo. The flame flickered, casting soft shadows across his face. For years, she had regarded Judge Whitmore with a strange blend of fear and respect. His robes, his authority, the quiet weight of his presence had once seemed invincible. But now she saw him clearly. Not a judge, but a desperate father. A man who had twisted the law, buried evidence, and bartered truth for legacy, all to shield the boy he raised from the consequences of a killing. But Marta was a mother, too, and mothers fight longer, harder, quieter. When the news broke, it hit like an earthquake, shattering the illusion of order that had cloaked the Whitmore legacy for over 2 decades. It began with a headline, then a second, then a wave. An anonymous whistleblower, her, had released a trove of damning evidence. Doctor police reports, body cam footage that had been deliberately withheld, and payment receipts funneled quietly to a coroner who had rewritten the cause of death. The district attorney's office, backed into a corner by public outcry and irrefutable proof, had no choice but to reopen the case. Within hours, the Whitmore estate was besieged. Cameras lined the gates. Helicopters hovered overhead. Headlines screamed betrayal. The press wanted answers. And they got them. The second man in the car that night, long hidden behind layers of silence and protection, was identified as Daniel Graves, a wealthy investor and high-profile political donor. He was arrested at a private airfield, boarding a jet under a false name, suitcase in hand. Logan Whitmore, once the golden boy shielded from consequence, now faced the full weight of justice. He was indicted on multiple charges: obstruction of justice, false testimony, and conspiracy to conceal vehicular homicide. His name, once whispered with privilege, was now spat out in courtrooms and newsrooms alike. But the true thunderclap was reserved for Judge Whitmore. The man who wore the robe of justice had, in secret, shredded its very fabric. Investigations revealed he had personally signed sealed orders suppressing critical evidence. He had tampered with the chain of custody, made quiet calls to quiet people, and used the bench not as a pillar of law, but as a shield for his son. The fallout was swift. He was disbarred, stripped of title, pension, and dignity, forced into retirement. His public statement, a hollow apology delivered in a crisp suit, eyes sunken with shame, aired on all major networks. In a modest apartment across town, Marta Espina sat alone. The glow of her old television flickered across the peeling paint of her walls, illuminating half-used bottles of cleaning spray and a silent photo of Luis. She didn't smile. There was no victory in this. But she wept, quietly, deeply, not out of joy, but for Luis, for the boy who should have turned 29 this year, for the 12 long years spent scrubbing baseboards in a stranger's home, grieving invisible, while justice sat behind closed doors she polished clean every Tuesday. 6 months passed. The world moved on, as it always does. But for Marta, time drifted like fog, thick, slow, and quiet. Then one gray morning, as the sky hung low with the promise of rain, a letter arrived. No return address, just her name, handwritten on the front in careful, uncertain strokes. Inside was a single slip of paper. The ink trembled across the page, each word etched in shaky cursive. I should have asked your name 12 years ago. I'm sorry. Whitmore. Taped beneath the note was a key. The same key she had returned after the lawsuit. Cleaned, cold, symbolic. She stared at it for a long while. Something deep within her, a feeling too complex to name, told her what it meant. He wanted her to come. One last time. And so she did. The mansion stood quieter than ever, stripped of its former grandeur. The once manicured hedges were wild now, unruly with ivy. The white columns, dulled by rain and neglect, leaned tiredly against the gray sky. She unlocked the door with the key he'd sent. No one else was there to greet her. Inside, the air smelled of dust and age guilt. Faint traces of lemon oil clung to the baseboards, ghosts of the years she had spent trying to scrub away the truth. She stepped carefully across the creaking floorboards and found him in the study. No robe, no gavel, just an old man in a chair that now seemed far too big for his shoulders. He looked up when she entered. Their eyes met, the silence between them louder than any accusation. I was trying to save my family, he whispered, voice raspy, stripped of power. Marta didn't flinch. She stared at him, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Then quietly she said, "You destroyed mine." He nodded, slowly, as if the weight of it had finally sunk in. There was nothing more to say. No defense left to give. No sentence that would change the past. She turned to leave, but his voice, soft and unsure, stopped her. "Do you hate me?" She paused in the doorway, her hand grazing frame she had dusted 1,000 times. "No," she said, her voice even. "I pity you." And with that, she stepped outside, without cleaning, without touching a single thing. For the first time in 12 years, the house stayed exactly as it was. Dirty. Logan Whitmore was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Daniel Graves, exposed as both the driver and the orchestrator to cover up, received 25. Judge Whitmore disappeared from public life entirely. No interviews, no appearances, just a name quietly removed from plaques and courtrooms, fading like a shadow at dusk. With the modest settlement she received, Marta built something lasting. She named it Luis's Light, a non-profit legal aid foundation for families failed by the system. Victims of injustice who had no voice, no power, no help. The foundation grew quietly, steadily. But Marta remained behind the scenes. No press, no camera flashes. She never told her story, never sought credit. She was the invisible architect of change, just as she had always been. Yet some things never left her. Every Tuesday, without fail, she lit a candle. The same way she had since the night everything fell apart. She would sit in silence, whisper her son's name, and feel the warmth of the flame flicker against her fingertips. The scent of bleach still lived somewhere deep in her memory, mingling with early morning mist and the cold echo of a judge's footsteps down polished marble halls. In that quiet, she knew something most never would. Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens or verdicts. It doesn't always stand behind a podium or wear a robe. Sometimes justice comes slowly. It seeps in under the door. It waits in silence. It comes when you mop the same floor for 12 long years, and finally leave the door open,